Hey there everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Eric's Drink Whiskey. Miller here, flying solo as we are trying to get in videos whenever we can due to work hampering in on the important stuff in life, being whiskey. So last week saw the anniversary of the passing of the Bottled in Bond Act. What is that, you ask? Well, it's a good thing you're here. Bottled in Bond Act was passed March 3rd of 1897, and it was the first legislation of its type involving food and drug purity here in the United States, and it was about none other than bourbon. We've talked about it a couple times, either in the video or through the podcast, but at the time, turn of the 19th century, there's some pretty hinky things going on in the whiskey industry. You had a lot of Canadian distillers that were starting to get into the game and encroach on America's native spirit. Also had some distilleries down in Mexico. On top of that, you had what were called rectifiers. So a distiller would make the whiskey, throw it in a barrel, and sell that barrel to a rectifier, a middleman, who would then turn around and sell that to the final consumer. Only problem was the rectifiers were in it to make a buck. So how do you make whiskey go further? Well, you water it down. Now, we've all had ice cubes melt in our drink. We know what watered down whiskey looks like. We know what watered down whiskey tastes like. Well, you got to get that color back up to where it should be. You got to get that flavor back up to where it should be. So to do that, you were getting all kinds of nasty stuff like tobacco spit and tea and different coloring agents to get the color back up, and you were also getting all kinds of nasty stuff like turpentine to get that bourbony twang back to the spirit. Excuse me. That was not good. So to combat that, to also give distillers a tax break, a gentleman by the name of Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. of bourbon fame helped champion this piece of legislation. Now, Colonel Taylor was not a real colonel in the sense that he led troops into battle in any branch of the U.S. military. He was a Kentucky colonel, which is an honorific, kind of like Colonel Sanders. So we have Colonel Taylor to thank for the Bottled in Bond Act and the tasty 100 proof bourbons that have come from that and lasted throughout time. Now, the Bottled in Bond Act, in addition to all the taxation stuff, really gave us what we know as the groundwork for bourbon today, that it has to be 51% corn, that it has to be aged in new charred oak containers. The Bottled in Bond Act said for at least 4 years that the spirit that's bottled has to be the product of one distilling season, and they define that as January to June, July to December. So you could batch your products as long as it came from that one season of the year. That's where we also get the proof requirements such as barrel entry and distilling proof, and that's also where we get the final bottling proof for a Bottled in Bond of 100 proof, also known as 50% alcohol by volume. Now granted, 20th century saw a lot more being done in the way of food and drug purity, and honestly at that point the Bottled in Bond Act kind of, while it was the basis, it's fallen by the wayside. Obviously now you can have 2-year-old bourbon, you can have 80 proof bourbon, you can have 90 proof bourbon, you can have small batch, you can have single barrels. So we've gotten away from it, but I have a lot of respect for these fine folks, and these are only a small representation of the Bottled in Bond bourbons out there that stick to the guns and stick to the tradition of the Bottled in Bond Act. I like Bottled in Bond bourbons because in their infinite wisdom, the folks back then were onto something. 4 years is a sweet spot. That's where you get that kind of that moonshiny taste knocked off. You start to get a little bit of oak in there. 100 proof, right where I like it. So it's a good drinking bourbon. You're not going to get anything too complex, but it's going to be a good whiskey. I especially like craft distillers who go that extra mile, even though they don't have to, and put out a Bottled in Bond product. I'm thinking of, I think it's Old Fourth out of Atlanta. They do a nice Bottled in Bond. Starlight Hubers, has a bottled in bond bourbon. New Riff has a bottled in bond. All fantastic products. Really got to admire them for taking that extra step to put out a 100 proof product that meets those strict standards that are really kind of superfluous in this day and age. But so to celebrate the Bottled in Bond Act and its anniversary last week, I thought I'd sit down and raise one to the man who made it happen, Colonel Taylor. Bottled in bond bourbons they're not fancy, but they are getting a little bit harder to find, especially from the distillers like Heaven Hill, who give us the Heaven Hill 7-year-old and the McKenna 10-year-old. You're starting to see those kind of turn into more kind of premium products. Heaven Hill also makes the Old Fitzgerald bottled in bond, their weeded recipe. That's been turned into kind of an ultra premium annual release of some ungodly high age for like $300. E.H. Taylor is a little bit harder to find simply because it's a Buffalo Trace product and there's a lot of fandom behind that label. I've been fortunate that I've tubes of E.H. Taylor sitting on the shelf at retail at my big box liquor store. Retail on these is about $40, $39.99. Is that high? Sure, considering you can get like Beam Bonded for $20, Old Tub for $20. You can get a liter of Early Times for in the 30s. JW Dance in the 20s. Evan Williams White Labels in the 20s. But I will say, I think while it's not age stated, it's a bit of history, and it is a little bit older than the rest of these offerings. Obviously, you've got your higher end, your age stated 7 and 10-year-old. That's definitely going to come with a higher price tag. So, here's to Colonel Taylor and the Bottled in Bond and bourbon in general. It's kind of refreshing to go back to a Bottled in Bond after, I don't know, doing all the fancy stuff we do, because it's just good, classic, clean bourbon notes, caramel, brown sugar, vanilla, just a faint whiff of oak on there. Sweet, dusty corn, a little bit of kind of a green apple with some baking spice and cinnamon. One thing that I especially like about E.H. Taylor that I think really sets it apart is, I think it is a little bit of that age on there. There's a pleasant mustiness, like the only way I know to explain it is like a church basement that you get on the very back end. It kind of sneaks up on you. I really like that. I think it's it kind of goes with the vibe of the bottle and the tube. It's very vintagey, you know, you feel like you're experiencing history. So I think that's really nice. E.H. Taylor is a fantastic drinking bourbon. I do really enjoy it. I don't know that it's worth the hype that surrounds it, and I certainly wouldn't pay more than $40 for it. But it falls in line with the rest of these bottled and bond bourbons. They're a good quality product. You know that you're getting something that's at least 4 years old, that's 100 proof, that's not blended all to hell. And I think still today, that's what the bottled and bond designation shows, is you're getting a quality product. You don't have to worry about it, which is why my Evan Williams bottle is not up here, because it's gone, because that's my decanter fill as Evan Williams. It's just a good drinking bourbon. So without yammering on too much further, just wanted to say thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on all of our social media profiles, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Check out the Eric's Drink Whiskey Non-Chill Filtered podcast and Eric's Drink Whiskey Straight from the Barrel, our blog, if you're more into the written word. But this has been Miller, sitting here sipping some E.H. Taylor, bidding you adieu and cheers.